It's August 2014. We were on our annual shopping trip for school, but little did I know this was going to be the last shopping trip, let alone the last day my grandmother would ever be outside of a hospital ever again. On this day, my grandmother was so happy, so excited to be spending it with me, but she was also excited about her doctor's appointment the next day. She was finally going to have the toe that had been bothering her amputated. The next morning, I wake up and me, my mom, and my aunt take her to the hospital. I remember the room that my grandmother was in very well. It was a small rectangular room with about 8 beds lined up. My grandmother was in the middle, and she had been rolled in there not very long before the doctor came in. The doctor came in and wheeled the curtains around to where it was semi-private, and he says, "You will not be able to have your toe amputated." My grandmother was livid. She was tired of the toe bothering her, she was tired of it hurting, and she just wanted it gone. He said, "You cannot have it amputated because you have a high percentage of blockage in the main artery of your heart." He said, "You need to have open heart surgery, and if you don't have it soon, you will have a heart attack and die in less than 2 months." I was shocked. I looked from my mom to my aunt to my grandma, and I didn't know what to think. My grandmother was crying. My mom and my aunt were questioning constantly, and the doctor said, "I promise you she will be fine. She'll have the surgery and she'll be back to herself in no time." They decided to do it a few days after. I remember the surgery taking forever. Me and my family were in the ICU waiting room forever. About 8 hours later, the surgery ends and the doctor comes in and he says, "She's in ICU, she's not awake, but she's breathing and she's good." He said, "Unfortunately, she doesn't look like herself, so I would advise young children not to go see her." I was upset because I wanted to see my grandmother so bad. After a while, bugging my mom, she decided to let me. Before we walked in the doors of the ICU, she looked at me and she said, "I need you to know that your grandmother does not look the same." I was like, "Whatever, I bet she does. I'm just ready to hug her." I walk in the room and I didn't think it was my grandmother standing there. It didn't look like her laying on that bed. She looked so lifeless. Her face was swollen 3 times the size. There was tubes and wires everywhere. I didn't know who that was. I couldn't touch her. I could just look at her. After a few days, the swelling went down, the tubes went away, and my grandma seemed to be getting better. She was soon moved from the ICU to the 6th floor of rehab. For about a week, she seemed to be getting better. She seemed to be getting back to her old self, full of it, telling people how she thought. She argued, but she was always coherent. After a while, it got worse. My parents had gotten a phone call the Friday before we ended school for Labor Day weekend. My mom picked us up and we drove to the hospital, and my grandma was now on the 5th floor. I was confused and I didn't know what was going on. I kept hearing the doctors talking about putting her on a drip system where she went slowly but unharmed. I kept hearing my aunt and my dad and my uncle saying, "No, let her go on her own, she'll pull through." And I believed that. My grandmother was strong, she was independent, she was going to live. On August 31st was the last time I ever saw my grandmother. I kept wanting to stay because she wasn't doing any better. She was now not talking, not coherent, she was just laying there. At about 2 a.m., my parents finally made me and my little brother leave, and they said, "Don't tell her goodbye, tell her you'll see her later." I couldn't even get the first word out of my mouth. I just threw myself on her and told her that I loved her. The next day, I woke up and my parents were gone. I get a call from my mom that asked if I was ready, and I said, "Yes, how's grandma?" And she just kept asking if we were ready to go, if we were dressed, and we kept asking how grandma was, and they would never answer, and I knew something was wrong. Whenever my mom walked in the door with the little box that I had bought my grandmother whenever she first went into rehab to put her hearing aids in, I knew she was gone. I held the box and I fell to the ground and I could not help Help it, I just lost it. I had lost my best friend, the firework that lit up every room, and the one who had so many friends, she didn't even know their names. On our way to my grandmother's house, I happened to hear the song Please Remember Me by Tim McGraw.
Tears had reached the sea. Part of you will live in me, way down deep inside my heart. The days keep coming without fail. Gonna find yourself. That's where your journey starts. You'll find that love strong as it ever was, deep as the river runs, warm as the morning sun. Please remember me.
After hearing this song, I knew it was something that my grandmother was telling me. She was telling me to remember her, but don't be sad, that I will find someone that loves me just as much as she did, and I will be happy again.